Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and I was playing Elden Ring the other day. This is before the DLC dropped, by the way, and thinking to myself, I wonder what they'll tell us, lore and story-wise. As an interview came out, the day I wrote this in fact, where Miyazaki was saying, oh yeah, you can expect to see this and that in the DLC. And I thought to myself, I better see this, I better see that. Dark Souls and Elden Ring has always taken the hands-off approach to providing answers. Many things are left intentionally obtuse and vague, but now and then they do give us some answers, or at least more information which changes what we may have thought. Take Bloodborne for example. When the game launched, some people believed that the cleric beast was a Lawrence. Then the DLC dropped and we found him there. Many of From's recent DLCs have focused on specific characters or been built around them, and these are typically characters hinted at in the main game. Artorias, Aldia, Ludwig, and soon, Mikola. Shadows Die Twice unfortunately never got a Tomoe DLC. Anyway, I want to touch on some of the lore mysteries that were never resolved. Before that, I thought I'd make this video, on some of the mysteries that have mostly been solved. So let's get to it. Number 1. Artorias. Back when Dark Souls came out in 2011, I remember a lot of the discussions revolving around Gwyn's Four Knights, Hawkeye Goth, Lord's Blade Kieran, Abyss Walker Artorias, and their captain, Dragon Slayer Ornstein. In the base game, we only ever met Ornstein, and even then, some argued that wasn't really him. Some argued it was Ornstein. Most of Sunlight Anor Londo was an illusion, after all. But then we did get his soul. Still, we had a fair few items that spoke of Artorias in the base game. The Wolf Ring, the Covenant of Artorias, the Soul of Sif, and its corresponding items. They all painted an interesting, mysterious picture of a dedicated, greatsword-wielding knight. A tale that struck a chord with many. The lone hero, the rogue knight with a wolf companion, and a hint of darkness about him. Then of course we got the expansion for Dark Souls, which took us to Ulasil, and we saw not only Artorias, but Kieran and Goth too. It showed us that quite a lot of the legend of Artorias, or at least perhaps the most important parts, can actually be attributed to us, our character, instead. Isn't that fitting, considering how muddled history can get, and the nature of how Dark Souls lore is to be taken? Number 2. The Dark Sign. This one is a little less clear, to be fair, but since the first Dark Souls, we all wondered about the Dark Sign, or at least some of us did. Initially, all we really knew was that the Dark Sign was a signifier of the undead. Those who bore it were locked far, far away. But what caused it, specifically, and what was the purpose of it? When a bearer of the curse is slain, they forfeit all humanity to the bonfire and are returned to it, consumed by the fire over and over again. It wasn't until Dark Souls 3 that we got a fairly good working theory. Gwyn created the Dark Sign. He sealed humanity with fire. In practice, this appears to be an attempt to feed the fires with the Dark Soul. The Ringed Knight armor remarks that the gods cast a seal of fire upon armor forged in the abyss, as well as the wearers, men. And even in the first game, we came across mighty seals formed by Gwyn, sealed by the Great Lord's power, or whatever it said. So it appears some form of sealing miracle was at least at his disposal, whether his directly or another god's that he bade to do so, like Flame God Flan, who knows. Whilst this point isn't entirely solved, we at least have a pretty good idea. Gwyn created the Dark Sign to seal humanity, also known as the Dark Soul, and the humans who bore it. Number 3. Speaking of Gwyn, we have his firstborn son. The identity of Gwyn's firstborn was a hot topic for many years, and we also had all those weird translation things in the first game where people thought he lost the annals, where in fact it was more like he was struck from the annals. His name was lost to the annals. Anyway, we had all sorts of contenders: Solaire, Andre, even Ornstein. I never put much stock in Ornstein. Soler was mildly more convincing, with his lines such as, "The sun is like a wondrous father, ho ho ho," and whatnot. But it was always Andre that convinced me. I could see it in his looks, his dialogue, and his role in the game. To further reinforce it, we eventually had the information revealed to us, I believe from the Dark Souls 1 design works, which I have here somewhere, that he was intended to be, at some point in development, the firstborn. But it was never confirmed in the final game. So, for Dark Souls 1, for Dark Souls 2, for all that time we could only speculate, until Dark Souls 3, which showed us the Nameless King, who is strongly hinted at to be Gwyn's firstborn son. This also served to give us a somewhat reworked Gwyn fight. We're not fighting Gwyn, but it was kind of a small glimpse of what it might have been like to fight Gwyn at full power. Still, we never got his name, which is a whole different topic. Some people think it's Sen, some people think it's Gwynfor, some people think it's Gwynsen, or some other variation of Gwyn. But I doubt we'll ever have confirmation. Number 4. Moving on from the gods, we have the man, Aldia, one of my favourite characters in Dark Souls 2, and the entire franchise. In fact, I think most of my favourite characters come from Dark Souls 2. You just can't beat Strayed and Aldia, I guess. When Dark Souls 2 launched, we heard a lot about Aldia, much like Artorias. He was mentioned often in the game, but never made an appearance, even though we went to Aldia's Manor, so I was heavily betting on him being in the DLC, being the titular Scholar of the First Sin. In the lead up to release, there was a lot of speculation as to who the scholar would be, and I imagine most people thought it was probably Aldia. That was the obvious bet. I thought it was Mr. Andiel, but if it wasn't him, I also had a more out there guess that it was Alenford, who's mentioned in like one item. But Aldia made a lot more sense, and lo and behold, Scholar came out. It was indeed Aldia, and we discovered that he had transcended his human form and taken a tree-like form which continues to fascinate to this day. Did he find some way to link himself to bonfires or the arch trees? His appearance in Scholar is great, giving us lots to think about, little tidbits and hints here and there. He also possibly had a cameo in Dark Souls 3, at least a cameo in item description form. Soulgeyser from Dark Souls 2 makes an appearance in Dark Souls 3 as Soulstream. They have the same icon though, and in Japanese these spells have the same name. Soryu no Honryu, Torrent of Souls. Dark Souls 2 established this is Aldia's spell, and the Dark Souls 3 version remarks that the first of the scholars doubted the linking of the fire and was alleged to be a private mentor to the royal prince, which certainly sounds like Aldia to me, but people will argue that the character mentioned in the Dark Souls 3 version is not Aldia, because in Dark Souls 2, in Japanese, he is referred to as Tankyusha, or Seeker, whereas this character is referred to as a Kenja, or a Sage. I don't really think that's a big problem though. Aldia simply went from being the Seeker to the Sage over however many hundreds of years, in the same way that Gwyn went from the Lord of Sunlight to the Lord of Cinder. Everything else lines up too well for this to be happenstance, in my opinion, although I know there's a popular theory that it's not Aldia, but Pontiff Sulyvahn, which doesn't make any sense because he is not a sage, he's not a Kenja. He's a fraudulent religious figure, and there's also zero evidence to suggest he ever was in Lothric or had any dealings with Lothric other than sending the dancer and the fat dog man there. In fact, the only evidence people have of that whatsoever is a statue of Prince Lothric that is, for some reason, holding Pontiff Sulyvahn's sword. And finally, number 5. Aldia leads us nicely into our final point, the endings. Which ending of Dark Souls is canon? People like to argue this for a long time before the sequel came out. Same with Dark Souls 2, which ending of that led into Dark Souls 3. Is there a canon ending for Dark Souls 3? As to that last, not really, because we don't have a Dark Souls 4, but in essence, both endings in Dark Souls 1 are canon, in my opinion. See, Dark Souls 2 established that a cycle exists. The fire is linked, the fire fades, once again it is linked. I went into a little more detail about that in a video titled Dark Souls Clock Theory. But in essence, imagine that Dark Souls 1 is 12 o'clock, Dark Souls 2 is 6 o'clock, Dark Souls 3 is 11 o'clock. It loops and begins again. A wheel of time. And you know, there are no beginnings to the wheel of time. And there are no endings. But this is an ending. That's how I looked at it. Did you link the fire? Very good. Did you not link the fire? Well, no matter. Someone else will show up at some point and do it. Dark Souls 2 has the interesting option of the bearer of the curse seemingly combining the power of many kings to escape the curse, potentially taking a new, original human, super powerful form. Maybe something closer to the Ringed Knights, the ancient humans, although before they were sealed. Dark Souls 3 gave us a variety of endings, the most satisfying of which might be the painter ending, if we can really even call that an ending. But it all loops around again and again. And this too is an ending, one that will lead us to a new beginning. The next video, where we'll talk about mysteries that were never solved. Tell me, what are some mysteries, solved or otherwise, that you are or were curious about? Let me know down in the comments, and until next time, thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, stick around because there will be more. If you really liked the video, you can support the channel through YouTube memberships, Patreons, buying me a coffee, maybe a donut, I don't know. Look in the description, there's like a bunch of links that will allow you to part with your hard-earned money. Because I am broke and hungry, subsisting largely on porridge and Dark Souls item descriptions, which aren't all that nutritious.